All right, Ruth. You could say in this chapter, Ruth makes an appeal. All right, let's read verses 1 and 2. Actually, we're going to read part of 2, but we'll read 1 and 2. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?" Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? It said kind of in a question. Well, what does all that mean? It kind of is confusing, but when Naomi said this, the time of the harvest was over. And certainly Ruth and Boaz had been around each other much in the weeks covering the barley and the wheat harvest. And so they had an opportunity to get to know each other pretty well. However, according to the customs of the day, we can't say that Ruth and Boaz were dating, as we think of dating in our modern culture. They were not paired off as a couple with one-on-one time with each other. Rather, they had spent time together in the context of a group. Men and women who actually worked for Boaz in the harvest. Also, dating can be relatively a superficial way to get to know someone, and each person in a dating relationship tends to put on a mask for the other. And what does I mean by that? Well, many women have been deceived into thinking that a man is good, a nice man, because he's nice to them in a dating relationship. Of course he is, but often he's nice because he wants something in that dating relationship. A better gauge to measure the man or the woman to see how they are, how they act toward other people in a group setting, because sooner or later that is how they're going to treat you. So might want to see how they treat their parents, because that's how they're going to treat you. So over a period of harvest, Ruth and Boaz got to know each other pretty well by seeing what kind of people the other people were around in a larger group. Well, when she says, "Shall I not seek security for you?" Well, we have to understand where she was going with that. Naomi knew that Ruth could best be taken care of if she was married. So she suggested that she appeal to Boaz for marriage. Well, the Hebrew word for security in this verse is the same word for rest. And where Naomi hoped that her daughter-in-law would find rest and security in a home, it would be with a new husband. This Hebrew word, I think it's pronounced manawich, speaks of a home that should be a place of rest and security. And so that's where she's actually going with that comment. And she said, "Well, is he not your relative?" Asked that question. One might easily think that this was inappropriate for a forward way of Naomi to suggest this to Ruth. It's possible to think that Naomi plotted with Ruth to make her a man trap, to go out and hunt down the reluctant Boaz for marriage. But that's not the case here. Naomi suggested to Ruth that she was rooted up in a peculiar custom in ancient Israel, a meaning behind the word goel. You remember we talked about goel. What does goel mean? Well, in this case, it was a point of the question that Naomi asked her. Is he not our relative? She reminded Ruth that Boaz was their family goel. The goel sometimes translates kinsman or redeemer, and it had a special meaning, a defined role in the Israeli family. Well, what are some of those defining roles? Well, the kinsman redeemer was responsible to buy a fellow Israelite out of slavery. He was also responsible to be the avenger of blood, to make sure that the murderer of a family member answered for the crime. He was responsible to buy back family land that had been forfeited. And he was responsible to carry on the family name by marrying a childless widow. See, in this, we see that the Goel, the kinsman redeemer idea, was responsible to safeguard the persons, the property, and the posterity of the family. Since Boaz was the recognized Goel for the family of Abimelech, the deceased husband of Naomi and the father-in-law of Ruth, Ruth could appeal to him to safeguard the posterity of Abimelech's family and take her in marriage. And it may seem forward to us, but it was regarded as a proper thing in that day. If Boaz did not fulfill his duty towards Abimelech, even though Abimelech was now deceased, then the direct family and name of Abimelech would perish. It would disappear. So the family name of Abimelech was thought to be an important duty to carry on. These protections showed how important it was to God to preserve the institution of the family in Israel. And that is also important for him today. Matter of fact, let me sidebar on that. That's one of the biggest problems we have I guess here in the States, much less the world, is the destruction of the family. And we've seen that being eroded, not just recently, but we've been seeing that eroded over years of time. I think it began back personally when they took prayer out of school, and then they took discipline out of school, and then it just builds and builds. So it's important. Family is important, and Israel had a way to keep the family structure intact, and that's what really this is all about. Let's read on. Naomi instructs Ruth as to how to petition Boaz to exercise his responsibility as her Goel. Here she says this: in fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down. And he will tell you what you should do. And she said to her, all that you say to me, I will do. Well, let's examine that first. Therefore, wash yourself. Naomi advised Ruth, showed a keen knowledge of male behavior, instructed her to go down and make herself pretty and smell good. Put on that Chanel number 5. Anoint yourself. Put on your best garment. And to leave Boaz alone while he ate. Don't bother the man while he's eating. Don't make yourself known until he is finished eating and drinking. And then she said, uncover his feet and lie down. At the appropriate time, Naomi instructs Ruth to go in, uncover the feet, and lie down. Some might think this was a provocative gesture. That's for the provocative mind. As Ruth was telling her to be provocative and offer herself in a sexual way to Boaz. But that's not the case here. In the culture of the day, it was understood that that was an act of total submission. In that day, this was understood to be a role of a servant, to lay at their master's feet and be ready for any command of the master. So when Naomi told Ruth to lie down at Boaz's feet, she told her to come in and be totally humble and permissive at what he needs. So don't lose sight of the big picture here. Ruth came to claim a right. Boaz was her Goel, her kinsman, her redeemer. And she had a right to expect him to marry her and raise up a family to keep the name of Abimelech alive. But Naomi wisely counseled Ruth not to come as a victim demanding her rights, but as a humble servant, trusting in the goodness of her kinsman redeemer. And she said to Boaz, I respect you, I trust you, and I put my fate in your hands. Of course, this is a situation that had the potential of a disaster. If Boaz should mistreat you, Ruth, in some way or other, it could have backfired. But Naomi and Ruth had the chance to get to know Boaz, and they knew what kind of man he was. He was a good man, he was a godly man, and one whom Ruth could confidently submit to. So she had that confidence in that. And then the last part of that is Ruth says, all that you say to me I will do. Ruth humbly and wisely received the counsel of her mother-in-law, Naomi. On a whole, we must say that eat and lay down. There was a good reason why Boaz slept at the threshing floor. Now, you understand, he's very wealthy, and he's like the big wig in the area. Why in the world would he sleep at the threshing floor? Well, here's a good reason. These were the days of the judges, when there was much political and social instability in Israel. And it wasn't unusual for gangs of thieves to come and steal all the hard-earned grain that the farmer had grown. Boaz slept at the threshing floor to guard his crop against these kind of attacks. Ruth did just as her mother-in-law Naomi said, heard the advice, she said she would do it, and she did it. Verse 8 and 9. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and there a woman was lying at his feet, and he said, who are you? And so she said, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. Well, this happened at midnight. I imagine it was a pretty amazing scene. We can well imagine that Boaz was indeed startled, waking up in the night as he turned in his sleep, knowing that someone was out there, but not being able to see clearly because of the darkness and the sleep that probably was in his eyes. And since Boaz had been there to protect against thieves, it must have given him quite a shock to wake up and know someone was there, but the shock quickly turned to wondering when he found out that the visitor was a woman. Ruth identified herself. She made a simple request. In the beginning with the word, she said, take me as your maid servant. Ruth again showed great humility and submission. She presented herself as Boaz's servant. And then she boldly, this is pretty bold, she boldly asked Boaz to take her in marriage. Now, usually the guy asks the girl, in marriage, but in this case, it was kind of just the opposite. And the phrase can also be translated differently in the Hebrew tongue. It could be translated this way: spread the corner of your garment over me. This was actually culturally relevant to say that. I'm a widow, take me as your wife, pretty much. Even to this present day, when a Jew marries a woman, he throws the skirt or the end of his robe over her to signify that he has taken her under her protection. Well, in Ezekiel 16:8, God uses the same terminology in relationship to Israel. I spread my wing over you, covered your nakedness. Yes, I swore an oath to you and entered into a covenant with you, and you became mine, says the Lord God. So, as you can see, it pretty much follows along with the same line of what the Scripture says. And, well, she said, for you are a close relative. It shows that this was not an inappropriate thing for Ruth to do toward Boaz. It was bold, but it wasn't inappropriate. Ruth understood that she had identified Boaz as a close relative. You are my Goel, my kinsman, my redeemer. And though deceased, Abimelech had the right to have his family name carried on. And as Goel, Boaz had the responsibility to do this for Abimelech. This could only happen through Boaz marrying Ruth, providing children to carry on the name of Abimelech. And Ruth boldly, yet humbly and properly, sought for her rights. That is pretty bold for a woman of that day, but we have rights today as Christians. We have rights that we need to stand up for, and unfortunately sometimes we cower to the government, or we cower down to organizations that want to say, well, you're unfair, or you're a hater, or you're inflexible. But we still have a right as a Christian to carry on the name of Jesus and to proclaim His name, and we need to do that. And so we too need to stand up and be bold and carry on that heritage that Jesus left for us. All right, verse 10 and 11. Then he said, this is Boaz's response. Then he said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman." Apparently there was a considerable age difference between Ruth and Boaz. We don't know how much that was, but it seems that way because of this. Boaz considered himself probably unattractive to Ruth and had therefore ruled out any idea of a romantic relationship. But it also shows something else wonderful about Boaz. He had the right to force himself upon Ruth as her Goel, but he didn't do that. He wasn't going to just say, "There's a woman I want, I have a right," and that was enough not to act as a Goel towards Ruth unless she desired it. But as we can see, she's the one that made the first move. It also shows something else wonderful about Ruth. She based her attraction to Boaz more on respect rather than image or appearance. Tragically, many people fall in love with an image or an appearance of someone rather than a person who they can really respect. I've seen a lot of that happen. I'll give you a good example. I went to my first class reunion. It was a 10-year reunion. I knew a lot of kids that right out of high school, got married and all of that. And matter of fact, almost 50%, I know that's a big number, but I was about right. About 50% of those people at the 10-year reunion had already been divorced and remarried again, some of them more than once. Because they fall in love and they don't think about what they're really doing. They don't think about the person. They don't think about if this is right. Oh, I was attracted to this person. Oh, she was the cheerleader. He was a football player. And when they get down to really knowing one another, they discover, well, we really don't work well together. And they should have took time to do that, and they didn't do it. So here's Ruth, and her idea behind the attraction of Boaz wasn't about appearance, wasn't about money. It was about respect. Boaz made Naomi look brilliant in her advice to Ruth. And the plan worked perfectly. Boaz was also attracted to Ruth because of her character. We don't really know how Ruth looked, but we do know that she was a woman of godly character. Literally, Boaz called Ruth the Hayah woman. What does that mean? Well, basically, behind the Hebrew word, it means strength, moral strength, good quality, integrity, virtue. The same word is used in the terms for heroes in the Bible, the mighty men of valor. Just as courage and strength make a man a hero, so Ruth's courage and strength shown her virtue and make her a hero as well. Let's read on. Verse 12. Here's a problem. Always is a problem when something is going good. Here's a problem. Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there's a relative closer than I. Stay this night. In the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. Oh, now there's the problem. There's another relative that's closer than him. And that relative probably didn't even know Ruth. I don't know. But We'll get to that later. But it causes a problem. Here we have this great matchup, Ruth, Boaz, and now, ding! Wow. There's a relative closer than I. That's like when you're in high school and you wanted to go out with this young lady and really liked her, and you got to kind of know her a little bit, and then you discover she already had a boyfriend. What? Didn't work. Well, this is going to work. Apparently, though, Boaz was the recognized Goel towards Ruth, there was another Goel closer in relation to her deceased father-in-law Abimelech. So Boaz could not exercise his right as kinsman and redeemer unless the closer kinsman redeemer relinquished his rights toward Ruth. Boaz wasn't willing to cut corners. He would do God's will, and he would do it in God's way. He knew that if it was really of the Lord, then it could be done orderly, and it could be done in a proper way. Verse 14, 15 tells us this. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she rose before one could recognize another. And then she said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Also he said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And then she held it, and he measured 6 ephats of barley, laid it on her, and then she went into the city. Ruth and Boaz were not trying to hide anything. It was that Boaz didn't want this nearer kinsman to learn that Ruth was now demanding her right to marriage to the Goel before Boaz could go tell him personally. And so he says he measured out these 6 ephats barley. As a proper gentleman, Boaz did not send Ruth home empty-handed. He gave her 6 handfuls of grain. All right, and then finally, and we'll end it up here, verse 16 through 18. So when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, is that you, my daughter? Then she told her that the man had done what the man had done for her, and she said, these 6 ephats of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. And then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has conducted the matter of this day. Sit still, my daughter. The man will not rest until he has concluded the matter of this day. This was a time of considerable anxiety, especially for Ruth, because she thought she had it all sewed up. She had claimed her right to marriage and thought she would be married. The only question was, who she's going to marry? Who's going to be the one that she's going to marry? Would it be Boaz, or would it be to the nearer Goel? The issue will be decided actually that very day. And that's where we end this chapter. But it's a good question. And there's a lot of truths we can learn in this. A lot of young couples need to read through this and see the relationship that is here, and how to learn how to respect one another, learn how to grow and together and learn about one another before they jump into any kind of a situation that could later be a disaster. And here's the last aspect is this. There's a lot of things in life that bring us anxiety and bring us fear and bring us worry and bring on stress. I think we live in a world that's more stressful than anything now, because we think about what's going on in Israel, Gaza, what's going on in Russia, what's going on in North Korea, and the gay and lesbian pride movement and abortion movement. And when we think about all those things, we just, it just drives us batty. But the bottom line is this. God's going to do what He's going to do in His time, as long as we let God do it in His way. And when He does that, whatever the result is, will be right. And we need to understand that. We can't make changes. We can't force people to do things. We can't force our situations, but we can stand up for what we believe, and we can stand up for what's right, and we can do what God has called us to do. And when all the dust gets cleared, the matter will be settled. And when it's settled, it will be the way God wants it to be. And you have to be satisfied with that. It's God's world, and we're living in it, and we need to follow what He tells us to do. And sometimes we may not like that. Sometimes it may not go with us the way we want it to go. But we have to realize that we'll have the victory because it's God's way. We will be victorious no matter what happens. And this is going to be a good solution. I guess you're waiting, beating breath for the part 4. But hang on. It'll all be good.